Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with a horror story. Today is Friday the 13th. Now, for most of us who are old enough to remember, that date conjures up memories of Jason Voorhees and his nightmare-inducing murderous rampages near Crystal Lake. So spooky. In 2021, that nightmare has been replaced by another horrifying reality, the modern Republican Party. For many hardcore Trump followers and the Orange Emperor with no clothes himself, this Friday the 13th is the day of his glorious and triumphant return to power. Yes, today is the day that the military, which secretly is in power, will hand over the White House to the bloated retiree over in Bedminster and remove the Biden hologram. Trump, like every sad narcissist, believes this lie. According to one report, he's taken to telling people that he would be reinstated as president. Now, how those people don't just laugh at his face is beyond me. But that probably explains why the hashtag Trump is a laughingstock trended all afternoon. The factually dubious and dangerous idea was cooked up in the rancid bowels of the QAnon interwebs and pushed by right-wing heretics led by the MyPillow guy.
By the time the morning of August 13th, it'll be the talk of the world going, hurry up, let's get this election pulled down, let's right the right.
On August 13th, Donald Trump is going to be reinstated as president. The alliance is going to overturn the cabal.
Nearly 30% of the Republican Party actually believes this nonsense. Well, it's past 7 p.m., and Joe Biden is still the president, and he's not a hologram. Because there is no constitutional mechanism or legal tool to reinstate a man who was rejected by 81 million Americans and lost his reelection bid. Period. Now, some of this seems comical. The sheer stupidity of it all masks the truly disturbing underbelly of the Republican Party in this moment. Because today is just another example of how far the right-wing misinformation machine is willing to go to feed poison to their people. Poison that led to a deadly insurrection. Poison that led to the only American president in modern history, in any of our history, to actively try to overthrow a free and fair election. Poison that prompted the DHS to issue a terrorism threat alert that included a warning about domestic terrorists engaged in grievance-based violence. The bulletin also warned of violence stemming from conspiracy theories based on perceived election fraud and alleged reinstatement. Sound familiar? The same poison that's now fueling a two-pronged attack on Democratic voters in the form of voter suppression and racial gerrymandering. This kind of corrosive propaganda has become acceptable to Republicans, even Republicans who know better, because it helps subjugate democracy in their quest for power. Why do they allow all of this poison? Well, new census numbers this week gave us a clue. The United States is increasingly multiracial and urban, and the white population is shrinking. Even more interesting, the majority of Americans under the age of 18 are ethnically diverse, the majority. What the census also showed us is that the bulk of that diverse population growth is in states like Texas and Arizona, where Republicans get to draw the lines in a way that ensures that they keep more power than they deserve. That's what we call gerrymandering, folks. That's also what happens when old America keeps the new America from fully blossoming, because democracy can die in broad daylight. That's why it feels like the deck is so stacked, because every time democracy ekes out a victory, Republicans throw up a new hurdle. Just take a look at what's happening in Georgia or Texas or at the Supreme Court, where conservative justices have left the Voting Rights Act on life support with a fading pulse. The next few months pose a make or break moment for America. The question is, what will Democrats do about it? And joining me now is Eric Holder, former U.S. Attorney General under President Barack Obama and the chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And General Holder, thank you so much for being here. You were just the person that I wanted to talk to in this moment when it does feel like our democracy is teetering on the brink of collapse. And I want to go back to start with this reinstatement thing. It's ridiculous, it's ludicrous, but it's also a national security threat. And I wonder if, as somebody who was Attorney General, you think that U.S. attorneys and the current DOJ is being aggressive enough in having some sort of consequence for pushing this big lie and these big lies that are actually potentially making people get violent?
Well, the Justice Department clearly is investigating and prosecuting all the people who were involved on January the 6th. It seems to me that there probably needs to be a wider investigation to see how you tie what happened on January the 6th to what happened starting the day, I guess, of the election immediately thereafter. It seems to me these are part and parcel of the same things. As the revelations come out about the White House trying to influence the Justice Department, trying to get people at the Justice Department to say that the election results were fraudulent and use that as a basis to then use operatives in the states to overturn the election results. This is something that I think calls for a pretty expansive view of, review of what happened. But here's the deal. I think in some ways the most important thing is for that congressional committee to look at all these things so that the information that they get can be shared with the American people and can be shared with history. Criminal investigations, a lot of it happens in grand juries. A lot of it doesn't get revealed to the public ever. And there has to be an accounting. Who was involved? What did they do? A prime question has to be, what did the president's men know? And what did they do?
Well, and we know that there is not a history in this country, unlike some countries, of prosecuting a former president. But this just seems like a sui generis case with Donald Trump. And we know that Spiro Agnew, the former vice president, was prosecuted, but there hasn't really been a history of that. But right now, this former president, Donald Trump, there is a Georgia investigation that is ongoing right now into his call to overturn the election directly there in the state of Georgia. Georgian election officials opened that in February about that phone call in which he pressured the Secretary of State there to overturn the election. And I wonder if combining that fact that he is already under that criminal investigation and the fact that there is this January 6th commission that is looking at what could come out to be crimes. I mean, George Conway has come out and said, there should be prosecution here. If you were still in a position to do so, would you be open to the idea that perhaps Donald Trump should be prosecuted?
Yeah, I certainly think that, everybody who was involved in that matter, and I mean, you can't cabinet and just think that January 6th is the only thing we need to be looking at. We've got to go back a couple of months. Everybody who was involved in that, everybody should be investigated and then potentially prosecuted. Now, prosecution of a former president involves a whole range of things that that's a little different from people who served below him. There are national interest divisions that could that could unleash, which is not to say that he should not be held accountable if he is found to have committed criminal acts. But at a minimum, an investigation needs to be done to find out who exactly was involved. What was the connection between people in the White House and people who were there on January the 6th, through intermediaries or directly?
And you were there, obviously, when Merrick Garland was chosen to be on the Supreme Court by former President Obama. So I assume know a lot about him. Do you get the sense that he is overcautious in that regard when it comes to investigating the former president, members of Congress, and others who may have been complicit in what was an attempted coup, an insurrection against the United States?
No, I don't think so. I've known Merrick for, maybe 25 years at this point. I think he's a person who's going to do things, by the book. I think he understands the enormity of what happened and the negative impact that, what happened on January the 6th and what led up to January the 6th, the negative impact that that's had on our nation. And, the negative impact that would occur if people who were responsible for all of that were not held accountable. I think he feels that. I think he understands that. And I think he's prepared, to make those kinds of difficult decisions. I got a lot of grief when I decided that I was going to look back at what happened in the prior administration when it came to the use of torture as an interrogation technique. And I think Merrick went into this job understanding that sometimes you've got to make these decisions that are going to be politically controversial, maybe even unpopular. I think he's got the kind of backbone that will allow him to make the appropriate determination in these cases.
Yeah, that is good news, I think, to a lot of our viewers. Okay, let's get to the other half of this threat to democracy. Republicans are using the big lie, whether they personally believe it or not. They're deciding to use it to their advantage. I know you sued multiple states when you were Attorney General over attempts to disenfranchise voters in some of these southern states and these red states. We now have that on steroids happening in places like Texas and Georgia, et cetera. In your view, how do we put the brakes on that enough to allow enough people to be able to vote so that we have a free and fair election in 2022? And are you worried that these states have now gone so far that we won't have a free and fair election?
They haven't done things to this point that are, I think, irreversible. I am concerned, however, that if we don't pass the For the People Act and pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that we can get to a point where they will put measures in place that will be irreversible and that could have a negative impact on our democracy. I mean, some of the things that they were at least considering, and I think it's still being considered in a variety of states, is this notion that you would somehow empower state legislatures to, in essence, overturn the will of the people, overturn a vote by the people in a presidential election. That kind of stuff has got to be outlawed. In addition to, the dark money components, the anti-gerrymandering component, the voter protection stuff that's all in the For the People Act. So, the best way to get at all of this stuff is to pass that legislation that the House has already passed and is now pending in the Senate.